My name is Alan Gray. I'm the director of the library. If you are a friend of the library, then you know that your donations to the library pay for all of our programs and all of our content. And it, among other things, pays for our side of this partnership with Stamford Hospital on the MedEd lectures. We're happy to have you here.
Good evening, everyone. They weren't sure if I was going to show or not, so I made it. So welcome. As I've welcomed you before, I see a lot of familiar faces. Want to welcome you to our fall semester.
I just need to make sure the microphone... I have a British accent, as you can hear, and I talk quite quickly, so if everyone is following me, that's good. And if I need to slow down, then just let me know. Just start going like this. We are going to do the lecture, because that's kind of why you came. But I want to probably say something that, this is what I say to, because I do teach the Columbia medical students. I teach them, I'm going to be teaching them about 2 weeks. I get about an hour to an hour and a half with the young Columbia medical students who are probably never going to do anything from the more natural world for the rest of their careers. They're going to go off and become super specialists and ophthalmologists and neuroradiologists and all these wonderful things. And so in my hour and a half of getting really a privilege to talk to them, I'm trying to give them an understanding of how the natural world, specifically nutrition, is going to be an incredible technique. It's going to be an incredible, essentially, tool, or even if you would like, weapon, to help with various medical conditions. So before we talk about this, I want to just explain this a little bit. So if you look at what my lecture is about, it's about ways to significantly drop your weight, your blood sugar, your cholesterol, and your blood pressure. And you could do it pretty much without medicine. This is how the natural world will allow you to do all of these things. But I want to big picture this for a second. And I want to say that the entire world does not have diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. There's lots of people with cancer. There's lots of people with rheumatoid arthritis. There's lots of people with irritable bowel syndrome, with depression, with lots of other autoimmune diseases. There's osteoarthritis. There are a myriad of different diseases. So what I want you to remember is that the eating plan, nutrition plan that we're going to go over tonight is not the only nutrition plan that exists. This is the one that we use. It's based on real research, which we will go off. This is the one we use for weight loss, cholesterol, diabetes, and high blood pressure. But what I need everyone to understand is that actually there are lots of different ways to eat. There are essentially, in the world of nutrition, three, and we all know this, there are three macronutrients. There are three different things you need to eat. They are protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And we have, in our practice, and I use these every single day, probably 6 or 7 radically different diets that are appropriate for one type of condition, but not for another. This is stuff that, unfortunately, most of the population have no idea about. So the diet, really, in terms of the nutrition, you want to give nutrition advice, you need to understand what is the disease you're trying to treat. And I do use the word treat because I'm not doing this to help. I'm actually trying to treat their medical condition. So a diet for rheumatoid arthritis is radically different from the diet I'm going to tell about. And the diet for cancer, or cancer and other types of diseases, again, is a completely different thing. And it's all based on what macronutrient, which proteins we're eating, which proteins we're not eating, which fats we're eating, which we're not. And so I do want everyone to understand that there are some general rules, which is that in general, humans should be eating diets that are high in fruits and vegetables. I think everybody knows that. But that is not the answer to everything. It is much, much more complex. And that's where the beauty of medicine in terms of nutrition is, where you can match the diet for the disease. So let's talk about one set of diseases, and this is probably one of the more common disease sets that I deal with, but again, I want you to understand that this is one eating plan. We have about 7, all based on clinical research. So this is just some blurb. Let's go to the next thing. All right, so let's talk about this. This is the scourge of essentially the modern world. It's also starting to happen in developing countries. So this is not something that is unique to Europe and the United States. This is going on everywhere. You have 1 billion people who are overweight. That is 1 billion. And if you look at the stats on America, then we're doing very well there. We're making a nice contribution. Okay. And obesity, that's the British Lancet, which is essentially the equivalent of the New England Journal of Medicine. It's the British equivalent. This was published about 6 years ago, that we have 300 million people in the world who are obese, and everybody is aware that that is not going in the right direction. That is going to continue. And there's an obesity problem and a high blood pressure problem in China, and there's a diabetes problem in India. So this is not unique to these great United States. In the United States, however, we're doing it better and we're doing it bigger, because that's kind of what they like to do. And God bless us, we're 50% of the population. And we're what, 300 million? So 150 million of us by 2030, which is only essentially 13 years. So if you have any grandkids, by the time they're getting through college and starting to go into graduate school, every second person is going to be obese in the United States. This is obviously a problem. And obesity isn't just aesthetically unpleasant or whatever you want to describe it. There are medical complications, and actually there's a whole load of research on obesity and cancer. So now you get into the whole concept which gets our particular job a little harder, which is which disease am I going to do first? So when you come in and you've got cancer, but you've also got diabetes, am I giving you a cancer diet? Am I giving you a diabetes diet? So this is part of what we do, and this is what we teach our residents, it's what we teach our fellows. So if we look at cholesterol, which is obviously associated with obesity, this is just some statistics from the NHANES. If you guys don't know what NHANES is, it's very simple. Every 10 years, the government uses our taxpayer money, and it's really a very good use of our money. And what they do is they do a sampling of the United States. So they are looking at roughly a representation of the United States in terms of the demographics, Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, etc. And they then try and find out everything they can about their health. So what they're going to do is they're going to do these enormous surveys, and they're going to take a lot of blood, and they're going to work out, okay, what is the average cholesterol for a male age 40 in the United States? What is a normal zinc level in the United States? What is a normal thyroid level? So if you really want to know what normal is, the range, you go to the NHANES data, and for the next 10 years, they're publishing stuff all the time about the normal. So let's just look at one of our more recent studies. This is 2005, 2006, so one assumes we're going to have some more stuff coming, and it probably won't look as good as this, and it doesn't look good already. So you've got 14% of men over the age of 20. You know, the Western diseases are hitting kids. You have 13-year-olds. I see kids. My last kid that I saw him about, an hour ago. He's 13. He's obese. And he's going to have cholesterol problems and blood sugar problems. He already does. And he's got adult disease, and he's 13 years old. And that is the way it is going. So if you look at this, you're looking at 20 years old and older, 14% of all men and 17% of all women will have a cholesterol level that is elevated. Okay? Which most of the time your doctors are going to want to put you on a statin. I have to be honest with you, most of our patients don't go on statins. We're going to teach you what to eat, and you're probably not going to need to go on your statin unless you have a good reason, like you have stents, you have heart disease, you have diabetes, you have a good reason to be on a statin. But everybody, I wouldn't say, needs to be on a statin. There needs to be a little bit more elegance to just putting everybody on it. That's my opinion. Other people can argue. Happy to argue. All right, let's talk about sugar. So in terms of diabetes, now you're looking at 35%. If you look at the 14% of men, we're doing much, much better when it comes to blood sugar, because blood sugar is really intimately involved with weight. So if you have a family history of elevated blood sugar, or you have diabetes, or your uncle or your aunt or your mom was diabetic, you put on 20 pounds, you're going to have some blood sugar issues, for sure, because it is really weight related. So we can see that 35%, which is 1 in 3 people, which is, we take all the people here, 10 of you, if there's 30 people in the room, are already going to have blood sugar issues that are going to be pre-diabetic going into diabetes. This is honestly what every single study, and whenever you look at a drug company and the drug company tells you you're going to use this because it's going to make your numbers better, they always have to say this, which is therapeutic lifestyle change is a critical component to any treatment. The problem with saying it in one of the drug company ads, and I don't have anything against pharmaceuticals because I think that they're very useful, is that they're not actually going to give you any details as to exactly how you're supposed to eat. So you're going to go and get a book. You know which book to get. You get mine, and I'll show you, but the point is that the idea is that you get a book, or your doctor's going to tell you some general concepts in what to eat, and it isn't going to work because you need to actually have an evidence-based plan to get this going. So you can't just pick something and I'm going to go paleo for a week. It was very funny, I was out to lunch with somebody today and I had some meat and I said, yeah, today's my paleo day. So the Paleolithic man diet. I mean, just go on, you just walk outside the library and you go and look at the different diets and there's 50,000 of them and they all have different variations on how much protein you eat. Is it an animal protein? Is it a plant protein? Do you just eat plant protein? Do you eat grain? Do you not eat grain? Do you eat olive oil? Do you not eat olive oil? That actually all becomes important. So the point is the devil's in the detail, and that's what we're going to talk about. So now let's talk about what the government, not to necessarily attack the government, but here goes. This is the 2010 guidelines for how Americans should be eating. And you're going to look at this and you're going to say, all right, so they say that 10% to 30%, something like that, of this pie, that's a pie, not a pizza pie, but it is protein, and nonetheless, is supposed to be protein. And the protein should not be to preponderance of animal proteins in terms of, you don't want to have masses of saturated fat found in lots of red meat. There are health problems with that. I'm not a big anti-fat, saturated fat person, but there are some health problems with lots of red meat. So we know that. The government also talks about fat, and it does want to limit saturated fat to 10%, even though the research right now is not particularly anti-saturated fat. So saturated fat can be unsaturated, it can be saturated. Saturated means that at room temperature, it is a pile of butter or cheese sitting on here. That is saturated fat. And there was a lot of research for ages about, or arguments about, that saturated fat was very bad for you, and so you can't have cheese because they're bad for you. And now we know that unfortunately, that was probably the wrong way to go. So what happened is everybody went low fat. And so what they did is, and this is all over the New York Times, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but the point is that as a result of that, everybody went for as much sugar as you could have, because the human tongue, the human taste needs 2 things. It needs sweet, or it needs the texture of fat. That's what gets us going. That's why we love ice cream. It doesn't just taste good, it has the texture of fat, and it has sugar in, and that's just exactly what you want. So the problem you have is that we realize that if we had to get rid of low fat, if you don't give us something, no one's going to eat it, no one's going to sell any ice cream. So what do? They put in as much sugar as they like, because that doesn't matter. But now, as we just showed, we have a diabetes problem because all that sugar was probably a bad idea and everyone's now obese because of it. So the fat issue, I'm not particularly anti-saturated fat, but the government's recommendations is that we try and limit saturated fat, and your caloric intake from fat should be about 30%. They then say that this is the amount of carbohydrate, which is about 300 grams a day, and this should come mostly from whole grains. And this is what the government tells you, and this is what the newspapers tell you, and this is what everybody tells you, and I'm going to tell you that that is wrong. And I'm going to show you why it's wrong. No, I'm serious. It is wrong. If you have diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, if you are a spinning health person in the Darien equinox and you are 6'2" and weigh nothing and you're full of muscle, then that's perfectly fine for you because you're exercising appropriately. But if you're not exercising, then you shouldn't be eating that way, because that is the point of this, which is that the whole point of these guidelines, there was another set of guidelines that no one ever equates. They never put the two together, and it doesn't make any sense. The second set of guidelines is the activity guidelines, which is that you need to be doing between 30 and 60 minutes of aerobic activity every day, which means go spin 6 times a week, and nobody's doing that. So you want to eat like that, you have to also do the, you can't just do one part and like that, but the second part you didn't do. You've got to do it all. So the point is that those guidelines, if you're not, there's nothing wrong with the government guidelines, they just don't work for most of America because their lifestyle isn't an active lifestyle. So you have to eat according to the level of your activity. So now let's talk about some of the diets. Here we go. This is the Lancet. Everything's based on evidence. How we doing, all right? This is Weight Watchers. So the point of this story is, I'm not going to try and insult every other diet. I'm going to show you the limitations in just calorically restricting every single food. So just saying, it doesn't matter what you eat, as long as I'm eating 1100 calories, I'm going to lose weight. I would basically eat chocolate. That's what I would do. I would just eat chocolate all day, 1100 calories, and see where we go. I am pretty certain I would feel sick, but it is chocolate. So that, it can't be that bad. But the point is that essentially with Weight Watchers, and Weight Watchers has some really good things about it, but it is caloric restriction. All you're doing is cutting down to 1100 calories. You're eating the same as you normally eat. Same thing with Jenny Craig. When you look at the ads for Jenny Craig, they're going to show you your muffin, and they're going to show you the pasta. You can still have pizza. I mean, that's how they sell it. That's why they get these pretty people on TV to sit there and tell you about it. And the reason for that is because they're giving you lower portions, but they're not radically changing the composition of your diet. So looking at Weight Watchers, this is the Weight Watchers study in the Lancet. You have 230 people. They do Weight Watchers for a year. You have 214 people. They go and see their doctor, and they get the general medical advice that most physicians who don't do a lot of nutrition do, which is, I want you to eat less and exercise more, which is kind of a general thing. And the problem is it depends what your disease is as to what you should be eating. But anyone can eat less. I mean, eat less is fine. Okay. So at the end of the year, if you were Weight Watchers, you were about 12 pounds, which is not unreasonable. I mean, I like patients to get to at least 10% of their body weight being lost, because that's a statistically and a clinically significant drop. So I don't know how much they weighed at the beginning, but 12 pounds is not shabby. It's okay. If you're 350 pounds, 12 pounds probably isn't going to be quite what you're looking for. And on the standard group, they lost 5 pounds. But the reason why I draw attention to this is because really and truly, when you looked at the metabolic indices, which is the blood sugar, the good cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, nothing changed. Why did nothing change? Because Weight Watchers is designed to lose weight. It is a Weight Watchers. That's what it is. They're not saying they're going to drop your cholesterol. They're not saying they're going to drop your sugar. They can't claim that. It doesn't happen. All they're doing is saying you're going to eat less and you're going to drop weight. And I have no problem with that at all, as long as you understand. But the reason you came to see the lecture was for me to tell you how to drop your weight, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your sugar. Well, Weight Watchers is not going to work for you on that one. Weight Watchers is fantastic about community support, which is incredibly important. They also, basically, they weigh in every week. And I love all this. This is all really, really very, very good. And that's the way, because it's a lifestyle that you want to do with other people, and you want to weigh every week. All right. So the question is, if you want to do everything, then this diet probably is not for you. So now let's look at the New England. Again, every journal is, these are the most prestigious journals in the world. So you don't have to guess. It's already been researched. We kind of know about nutrition. There's no surprises here. So in this one, we've got, this is old school stuff we can talk about. If you want to talk about later on all the different diets that are on the market, we can certainly discuss that. This is old. It brings me to a very interesting point. Most of the people who write books have no research in terms of actual published clinical studies on their theories. So the great Dr. Atkins, he wrote a book, which I read, which I really thought was very interesting. but he has no published clinical studies to show it's effective. What actually happens is he goes, sells 6 million copies, and then at some point, somebody says, you know something? It's the complete opposite of any drug company. Because in a drug company, you can't just do that, and let's just sell it, and if it works, then we'll kind of go and ask the FDA for approval. That when the hospital ran an Ornish program, and this is not anti-Gene Ornish, because he's a phenomenally good researcher, and he really does prove what he's talking about. But the problem is that when they ran the Ornish program at the hospital for about a year or two, what they found is everybody just couldn't keep it in the end. You can keep it for 12 weeks, but it isn't a practical diet, because you're really eating almost no fat. And as I said, fat is, you want to eat fat, you want to actually enjoy food. So, most people do. Okay, so they did this. This was 2 years. This was a very neat study. Just want to tell you what's cool about it. As you probably heard, so my family comes from Israel. And so there are areas in Israel where you are kind of living near factories. So they went to a factory in the middle of the desert. I have no clue what they were making. I don't think it was the nuclear facility, but anyway, whatever they were making there, they were making something, and they get given food. So you have an amazing thing where you've got all these people, and they're not going to go to the local, supermarket to buy stuff. They are fed on site. So therefore, it's like amazing lab rats. You can just feed them whatever you want for 2 years and see what happens. And that's exactly what they did. It was kind of a brilliant study, and that's why it's in the New England Journal of Medicine. I mean, that's not a shabby journal. So if you look over the period of 2 years, the Atkins does about 12 pounds, the Mediterranean does about 10, and the low-fat diet does about 7. Again, reasonable. What is important to remember in all these diets is that, again, none of them actually has any significant change in your LDL cholesterol, which is one of the things we're talking about. Again, I'm happy to come back next year and tell you about a diet for rheumatoid arthritis. I'm happy to then tell you about the whole diet for an hour about cancer, and then the diet for irritable bowel syndrome, and then the diet for autoimmune. Remember, this is just for diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol. Okay, and weight. So now, let's look at Atkins, South Beach, Weight Watchers, and the Zone. These are all quite well-known diets. So this was done in Canada, and the usual care is the usual, what they've been doing for years, which is low-fat, which again is something that's a little passé in terms of most people realize that low-fat is not enough. You need to be a little bit more specific. And they did this for a year, and you can see Weight Watchers, relatively good, 7 to 13 pounds. They put a little weight back on. Atkins, they don't always consistent with the Atkins, because the Atkins diet, in case no one knows, everyone probably knows the Atkins diet, but the Atkins diet essentially is almost no carbohydrate. There isn't a lot of elegance to this. There are 3 food groups. There is fat, there is carbohydrate, there is protein. If you decide that you are going to eat no carbohydrate, so you have 20 grams of carbohydrate, you are therefore going to eat lots of fat and lots of protein. The Atkins actually is not very healthy. It's not a good way to go. There are much more reasonable versions of that. But that is essentially Dr. Atkins' diet. The Zone is a little different, and the South Beach was a more reasonable version of the Atkins. Okay, so South Beach, really no difference from usual care, which means that they lost some weight, and the usual care lost 5 pounds, and the Zone lost about 3 to 7 pounds. So again, the same type of thing. There is some weight loss with all of these diets, and you can get them all in this fine institution. But again, there is no difference in terms of blood sugar. There's a mild improvement with blood pressure with Atkins. That's probably rather temporary. And there's no difference in triglycerides or good cholesterol. In other words, metabolically, none of these actually have a huge effect. They are mostly weight loss in terms of what they're doing. So now let's talk about a diet that really does work and is very, very neat. But I want to turn it on its head a little bit. So the way we do this is, everybody has probably come across the Mediterranean diet. It's actually a diet that we use very often. There is a preponderance of information and a preponderance of evidence that this is a good diet for diabetes and heart disease, and probably for dementia. In fact, if you look at medical research, the entire time, they're always showing how the Mediterranean diet is a very healthy diet. So I'm going to spin on ahead a little bit. We'll just talk about what the Mediterranean diet looks like. Like a lot of healthy diets, you are going to have at the bottom of the pyramid a preponderance of fruits and vegetables. That is avocado. That is full of fat, by the way. That is monounsaturated fat. So the Mediterranean diet is not a low-fat diet at all. You also have grains, and the grains are healthy grains. They are whole wheat. They're going to be, you're going to have things like, that's a yam, that will be fine. You're going to have olive oil over here, lots of different fruits and vegetables. Then you get up to the proteins. The proteins are seafood and lots of fish. The Mediterranean diet is very high in omega-3s. There's a lot of research on the fact that omega-3 is important to reduce inflammation. In fact, there's a study published today discussing how obesity is probably worsened by the fact we're all eating far too much omega-6 and not enough in omega-3. And lo and behold, the Mediterranean diet is quite high in omega-3. And then you have some of the other proteins, which are things like cheeses and chicken and eggs, which you have less. Up the top is meat, as in red meat. And then you have a rare amount of sweets. And you have every day a glass of wine. And who can say anything bad about that? Now, the point of the Mediterranean diet is the bottom of the pyramid. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the part of the diet that no one ever talks about, but this is probably the fundamental part. It's not a diet. It was never a diet. And if you go research it in Greece or southern Spain, you're going to see that it's a lifestyle, not a diet at all. It isn't a diet. The diet is the one piece. So when you do integrative medicine, you're always looking at the big picture. How do they eat? How do they sleep? Who do they live with? What are their stresses? How do they move? Exercise. So the point about the Mediterranean diet is that this is Zumba. They're literally exercising. I don't know who he's dancing with, but this guy... So this is a very interesting idea, isn't it? They're sitting down and having a meal together, which is obviously kind of wild. So it turns out that there's a study in Rosetta, Pennsylvania, where Rosetta, this place in Pennsylvania, has less heart disease than any of the surrounding areas. And in Rosetta, Pennsylvania, they have the same people as everywhere else, and they have the same medical problems, but they don't have heart disease. So they've still got the same rates of, chronic medical conditions, but yet they don't have heart disease. So people can't work out why that would be the case. And then they looked at Rosetta, Pennsylvania, and they found that there was a great preponderance of people of Italian descent, which is fantastic, who obviously try and eat Mediterranean, but they all live in multi-generational homes. So actually you're living with your grandmother, or if you're Hispanic, with your abuela. And all of these things, actually, they think that that has an effect on your health. Because social connection, it isn't a diet, it's more than a diet. Social connection is incredibly important. You have to have purpose in life, and you have to have social connection to other people. And if you are purposeless, or you are lonely, you will get a medical problem. You will get one, because that's the way the game works. So if you look at over here, you can see that the Mediterranean lifestyle includes this. It includes walking when you're old. You go to the grey zones of Mediterranean where everyone lives forever. They're schlepping these water up the road, and they're like 100 years old. It's unbelievable. So they don't need to spin. If you need to spin, you spin. But if you're in Italy, then that's what you do. They're playing soccer over here because they don't play American football. So, all right, so how Mediterranean are you? This is the question. The point of it is that it's a lifestyle. Who does a siesta? So you go to Greece, or you go to Southern Europe, or you go to any of the Mediterranean countries, and you go to the bank at 4 o'clock and you try and get your money out, because that ain't happening, because they're closed. And they're closed because they're going to have a sleep for about an hour, and then they're going to have, and by the way, they eat more at lunch, and they don't have so much for dinner. They do eat late, that's definitely true. But the siesta is an important part of this. They're working all day. They're not sitting down, going on the train to New York and working in the city. They are working in vineyards for 9 hours a day. And this is the Mediterranean diet. Okay, extended family. There was a Pennsylvania study. This is a really interesting idea, which is that if you look at the world of nutrition, there is a very new idea of something called intermittent fasting. So when you read about this, you read it in the New York Times, and you read it in the New Yorker, you'll read suddenly, oh look, there's this idea of intermittent fasting. It turns out that one of the ways you can live the longest is by eating less. So the studies they've done some interesting studies on monkeys in San Francisco, and they've got monkeys they've been looking after for, I don't know, like 20 or 30 years. I can't remember. They're rhesus monkeys. And one set of them eat 90% of all the calories. In other words, instead of having 100% calories, they have 90%. They've been brought up eating slightly less than they actually need every single day for their entire lives. And they have less cancer, and they have less heart disease, and they live longer, and they're not dying like the monkeys who ate the full amount of food. And the reason for this is because caloric restriction is actually a very important, it's a very vital part of re-establishing and normalizing your metabolism. When you don't eat for 24 hours, most of the systems in your body will actually re-equilibrate. Your blood pressure will go down, your insulin will go down, your neurotransmitters or the noradrenaline and adrenaline in your body will actually go down. We see this in research. So in the Mediterranean countries, which are, Greek Orthodox, etc., they have lots of fast days. So they're doing this. They're doing this all the time. So you've got to remember that when you look at a Mediterranean diet, you really do want to look at the Mediterranean lifestyle. Okay. So now let's talk about a study that we did on one of the diets that we use, one of our 7, and this is the diet that we like to use, and I'll go over it with you for diabetes, high cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight. Okay. We're doing okay, we're going to be finished soon, and then I'm going to answer any questions you like. Okay, so, in medicine in general, when you're doing research, and it's really important if you're going to do integrated medicine to actually do some research, because you want to show, and it should be outcomes research. So we're not doing randomized trials, we're saying, okay, we've got 300 people, they've all done this, and this is what's happened. And that is, it's not the most beautiful research. It doesn't get published in the New England because it's not, funded by the NIH, but it is outcome research that is still completely valid. So that's kind of what we're doing today. So the first study I did, which was in 2011, was 41 patients. They were 53. Most of them were male. This was when I was in a primary care practice in Greenwich, and they were put on a proprietary eating plan for 4 to 6 months. It was a modified version of a Mediterranean diet. It was not a Mediterranean diet per se. It was somewhat modified, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. It was modified in the sense that it only had about 1,000 to 1,100 calories, because as I said, you do actually, calories count. Calories are not the same at all. And you have to know when you're eating, and when you want to eat carbohydrate and when you want to eat protein, and so they're really not the same. And actually, though a carbohydrate and a protein, 1 gram of them has exactly the same amount of calories in the body. It doesn't work that way. It turns out that the protein is a more inefficient fuel, and the carbohydrate is a more efficient fuel. So it isn't just calories counting. That's not the only thing. It's much more complicated than that. But you do want to keep to 1,000 to 1,100 calories. You can't eat anything you like. And then the other thing is that instead of the pie that I showed you, which was the macronutrients, where you're about 60% carbohydrate, this was the stuff that the government was telling you to eat, and about maybe 20% protein and about 20 or 30% fat. This was different because what we were doing here was we were having less, and we were having much more of a balanced diet. This is the amount of carbohydrate you should have, okay? And this didn't matter whether you exercise. It's important to exercise. It's important to have relationships with other people, stress management, sleep properly, all of that's all what we do for a living for 100%. But just in terms of the eating, this was actually a much more reasonable amount of carbohydrate for the majority of the population who do not exercise as they should, which is 80% of everybody. So they were still eating grains. It's not a low-carb diet. It's not Atkins. It's not South Beach. It's not even a Paleolithic diet if you read the newest stuff. Because we do eat the grains, but the grains we give, they have to do something beyond just be calories. So what do we give? We give grains that are high in soluble fiber because that will lower your cholesterol. Grains from psyllium and oats and flax. These are the grains that you want to be eating. So that's part of the diet because we like those. We also want to get our carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables because fruits and vegetables are full of sugar and they're full of starch and they're your good carbohydrates. We don't want to be eating masses of carbohydrates. We certainly don't want to be having 60% of our entire calories come from carbohydrates. Just to give you an example, a bowl of pasta is 1,000 calories. A bagel is 1,000 calories. To burn 1,000 calories, my friends, you've got to spin for an hour. Do you know how much effort it is to do that for an hour, to spin so you can eat a bagel? That's the math. It's a lot. It's a lot. The fat, I have no problem with fat. The fat over here needs to come from the right types of fat. Saturated fat is not bad for you, but if you only have 1,100 calories and you want to spend 300 calories of your calorie count, you want to spend it on fat, you better get some fats that are better than saturated fat. So why not get avocado oil, olive oil, nuts, seeds? Why? Because they are going to actually have health benefits. So that's why we like that, very much a Mediterranean diet. The protein is about, again, maybe 300 calories, 400 calories, and this should come from lean protein. Now, there are people who don't want to eat animal protein, and that's perfectly fine. You can just go for tofu, and you can go for hemp and pea and rice protein, and that's perfectly good, and seitan, that works. But if you want to do an easier version, then you're going to have chicken breast, and you're going to have turkey breast, and you're going to have bison, and you're going to have eggs, you're going to have low-fat cheese. Not because milk fat is bad for you, but it's just too many calories. It's 9 calories per gram. You can't afford it. Okay. That was the diet. Look at the results. Okay, so there is no huge change in weight, really, because these people started off at being about 170 pounds. And so if they're 170 pounds and they're men and they're 5'6" and 5'8", that's not a bad weight for men. None of these guys were obese. I saw them in my private practice. What I can tell you is that actually the majority of them never went on cholesterol meds because there was no need, which I want to get to in a second. But I could follow them, and I followed them for a number of years while I was in private practice. So the money shots are basically this. This is the cholesterol it started off with, 242, and it goes down to 189. That is a 50-point drop. If you don't believe me, come see me this morning when I have my lady. She's an ED doctor. She's the mother of an ED doctor in Greenwich. She came to see me. She's only been on my ED like 150. I mean, I'm telling you, this is what happens. It's just about eating the right foods. Okay, so now let's look at blood sugar, 104 down to 96. Bad cholesterol, 158 down to 115. When you go and see your doctor with a cholesterol of 189 and an LDL of 115 and a blood sugar of 96, he tells you you're doing great, and that's the end of it. When you go to see him with a cholesterol of 242 and a blood sugar of 104, he tells you in 3 months you're going on 3 meds, because that's what happens. So there's no reason for it. So I just want to go to the non-compliant group. These were the guys who couldn't keep it. They couldn't keep it, God bless them. And as a result of that, nothing changed. So let's go over this a little bit. You have a 20% reduction in your LDL. You have a 20% reduction in your total cholesterol. You have an LDL cholesterol of 21%, and you have a blood sugar drop of 13%. So that essentially was the first study we did on one of the eating plans that we use. So then we decided that we shouldn't just go for a plan that was used in one practice. We would go for a plan that was used in 10 practices. So they're not all my patients. They're patients that are seen by lots of different people. I think Josh was a member of this cohort. So this was a different thing. It was published. They're both published in international nutrition journals, and this is the second international nutrition journal that we did it. We gave a little seminar. We explained to a number of the physicians about how we were going to teach them how the eating plan worked. And then we gave basically about 100 copies. It was just a copy. It turned into a book, but it was a copy of 15 pages of how you are going to eat. And they handed that out, the doctors. Same study. They did it for about 10 weeks of what is called the modified Mediterranean diet, and they handed it out to about 100 patients. 10 practices, 15 practices. Okay, so let's go over this a little bit. So a lot of the doctors were from Stamford Hospital, and 9 of them were from the ambulatory outpatient system of SHIP, which is one of the ones that we work with very closely and we're very happy with. And so basically you had 28 doctors. Of that, 15 of them, half of them, which I thought was rather nice of them, handed out about 100 booklets. So this is obviously a larger sample. It's 100 people. And Of that, we got about a third actually had patients that we could get the data from. Because what happens in any study is that you lose names, etc. So in the end, we have 85 patients who weren't our patients, who were patients of other doctors. And all that happened is they came in and were given this eating plan and said, instead of giving you meds, instead of saying eat better, I'm going to give you this booklet, you're going to follow it for 3 months. This is what happens. Okay, so the overall compliance is a little higher in men than women. I'm not sure quite why that is, but we went on that a little bit. I'll tell you about that in a second. So if you look at the cholesterol, what you've got essentially is there's a 15-point percentage drop in the total cholesterol. The good cholesterol actually does not change, but the bad cholesterol stays down again by 20%. It's exactly the same as the first study. So this is really being shown to be the same in the first study. I can tell you that I do this all day, and I see these all the time. So there's something here. I mean, when you see something 4 times, it may be a fluke. When you see something 5,000 times, it really isn't a fluke at all. And then I'll tell you finally at the end about the study we're doing right now, which is actually awesome. All right, so then the LDL goes down. The sugar levels go, this is pre-diabetic. An A1C of 6.3 is getting very close to diabetes. You drop down to 5.9. It doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it's an enormous drop because you've gone from pre-diabetic to just mildly elevated blood sugars. But what was amazing is that in the diabetic patients, you drop by an entire percentage point. Your A1C drops by a percentage point. And the only things that do that are drugs. This was literally as effective as drugs. The fasting blood sugar goes, so again, not significant, significant. What you get is a 14-pound, this is in 10 weeks, a 14-pound weight loss in men and an 11-pound weight loss in women. So to basically summarize that in our eating plan that we use, this is what we expect. In 10 weeks, you will drop your weight. Most men actually drop about 15 to 20 pounds. You will drop your cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, by about 20%, and you will go from pre-diabetic or diabetic to almost normal in 3 months. I'm going to talk about the comments and questions in a second. So what happened as a result of that is I write a book. It took about 5 years to do. The book came out in March. The book is doing very well, thank God, with the grace of God. The book is interesting because it's me and a chef who is now at the hospital, who used to be at Yale. He is a registered dietitian and he is a cordon bleu chef, and he has 60 recipes. So this is a book a little like unlike most books you're going to see, because it's literally a cross between a diet book and a cookbook. So it's quite neat. Now the reason why I tell you about this is not to try and sell you my book, it's to tell you about what we're doing, because what's happened since the book's come out has been really fascinating. In my book I ask people from anywhere that they are in the country to send me their data. Last week I get a guy in Australia. How the hell he's got from Australia? They just translated it into German, but Australia was like, okay, and he's sending me his data. He wants more recipes, because that's how it goes. He'll give me his data if I'll give him recipes. That's kind of trade. And he's lost, 12 pounds. The guy the week before, I get this every week. I've got 11 patients who I've never met these people, and they just read this book, and then they start doing it. And I have the data of these 11 people. And the guy from MI is, what is MI? Michigan. Okay, thank you. I'm a Brit. I don't know what MI is. Anyway, the guy from MI has dropped. I want to read you the email, because the email is quite extraordinary. So give me a second, because I'm not making this up. And then I will answer any questions you find people have. Little break. Okay, here we go. This is from a guy who read the book in MI. That's what I wrote to the publishers, because I have no idea what MI is. But, I know what MIA is. Okay, right. So this is some guy in Michigan. After 12 weeks on MAD diet, I have seen dramatic results. Week 1, His height has not changed. I don't know what it gave me his height. It's kind of cute. He was 5'6" then, he's now 5'6". Again, I wish he would stay taller, that would be a real claim. His weight when he started was 200 pounds. It's now 100. I mean, this is literally, I've got it right here. I just got it 2 weeks ago. 177 from 200 pounds. So he lost 23 pounds in 12 weeks. But what I love is, here's the money shot. His cholesterol on medication was 174. That was on medication. I'm assuming it was a statin. His cholesterol on medication is now 124. He's dropped by 30% on medication. His blood sugar has gone from 99 to 90. His hemoglobin A1C, which is the thing I told you about, the blood sugar, on medication was 5.8. It's now 5.6 off his medication. So he stopped the medication right there. And his triglycerides, this is kind of wild actually, were 262 on medication, and they're now 158 off his medicine. So in 12 weeks, he's literally come off 2 meds. So obviously I'm excited about this diet. What we're doing is collating this. When we get to 50 or 100 patients, it may take a year, may 2 years, we're going to publish that, because that is a totally legitimate trial of what happens when you publish a diet book. What happens to everybody? Do they do it? Do they not do it? And they sit there. And so that's kind of where we are. I'm happy to answer any questions about this diet, which is for this diet disease, or any diet for any disease you like. Go ahead.
You didn't specifically mention blood pressure. You mentioned it as one of the 4 items, but you don't actually mention.
Small drop in the blood pressure. Just got to find it. It wasn't. It's about. I don't know where it is. I've got to see where it is. It is, it may be in the first study. There was a small drop in blood pressure of about 3 or 4 millimeters of mercury, which is not particularly exciting, but what I can say is that as the weight goes down, the blood pressure goes down. You know, it's a great question. To be perfectly honest with you, blood pressure is probably the hardest thing to avoid taking meds for. So I have 3 patients this morning, all of whom are they're on herbs actually, which will work to help with their blood pressure. But they have to really keep it together. So one of them, she's not quite keeping to the eating plan. She's not exercising as she was normally. She's not sleeping, so her blood pressure is 150 again. You know, blood pressure is hard. The others are relatively easy. It's hard to do. Other questions, my friends? That's it. That's all we got.
No. What regimen or program do you use for exercise, given your schedule?
So personally, well, I'm very lucky because the Tully Health Center is next to my office, so I walk across. So if you come on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, I have a meeting, but it's yoga. That's my meeting. With half the people there actually are my patients, and so I do that. There's a Tai Chi on a Tuesday night. This is all stuff that's done, and then I go essentially about 6 times of the week, and I do aerobic activity and weights, because that's what you're supposed to do. There's not a mystery about exercise. You're supposed to do aerobic activity between 30 and 60 minutes most of the days of the week. You need to be doing strengthening 2 to 3 times a week, and you need to be balanced training 2 to 3 times a week. You want to do balanced training? Do yoga and Tai Chi. You want to do strengthening? Do weight training. You want to do aerobic? So do bike or swim or elliptical or any of those. But you have to move. The human body is designed, it's an incredible machine designed to move. And so you have to move it.
You just have to move it, not in any particular way, just what suits the individual person, as long as you do something?
You have to get to aerobic. So in terms of what is aerobic activity is defined honestly as there are different ways of getting to aerobic activity. And what you're doing is either you're using a heart rate monitor where you're trying to get your heart rate to approximately 70-80% of the maximal heart rate, and during that part you are actually an aerobic activity. Alternatively, if you can't do that, then you use the perceived exertion scale, where if you're walking and you can't have a conversation, the likelihood is you're probably in an aerobic zone. So you have to be aerobic. As to how you get there, that is totally preference. You know, so swimming works for some people, and if you've got osteoarthritis, then you probably don't want to be doing a lot of running. But either way, it's all the same general thing. But again, it isn't just aerobic. You have to do weight training because you have to have strengthening of the joints, which helps with the muscles, the muscles on the joints, and you have to have balance training. Balance training is incredibly important. As we get older, you no longer bounce like you do when you're a baby. You break. And if you break, it's bad. So don't break, because if you have good balance, you won't break. So that's why we think Tai Chi is phenomenal. Other questions, guys? Sure.
Protein powders, do they have any kind of bad effect on your body? That I've been taking at least one a day, sometimes twice a day when I lift weights, just because I'm craving food. And
So,
I start
thank-
protein powder, a shake as soon as I'm done with it, just because I'm so hungry. And it's 8 o'clock at night,
Right.
and I don't want to have a 700-calorie meal.
So that's a pretty typical regimen that people will do. Look, in terms of protein, I kind of alluded to this before. How do the high-protein diets work? Why does the Atkins diet work? Why does the Paleolithic diet work? Because they're giving you a lot of protein and they're not giving you a lot of carbohydrate. So, just to go back a second, just to kind of explain. So, if you have carbohydrate here, and you have 100% of the energy from carbohydrate, when you eat it, you've got all this stuff that you've eaten. You've eaten something that's purely carbohydrate. 90% of those calories are actually available to be used by the body. Okay? So carbohydrate is a really good fuel. In fact, the brain wants sugar. It's the preferential food for the brain is sugar. So there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. Why these Atkins diets are a little crazy, because they're too low in carbohydrate and the brain doesn't even get the sugar it needs. It has to start eating the breakdown products of fat. If you take protein and you, instead of eating carbohydrate, which is what a lot of people do, you start eating protein, lots of protein. Protein is an inefficient food. So it's an inefficient fuel. So what it means is that of the 100% of calories, you're only able to burn or use about 60 or 70% of them. So the rest of them, a third of the calories that you eat in the protein, actually they aren't used by the body for energy. That body has to use that energy to burn the fuel. It is an inefficient fuel. So now let's talk about protein. So people who want to lose weight will stop eating carbohydrate and will start eating protein, because they are the same amount of calories in terms of math, but they're not the same amount of calories in terms of actually what is used for energy. So you do lose weight when you go on high protein diets. There's just a lot of medical issues with high protein diets. So protein shakes, there's a whole myriad of protein shakes. Most of them are whey, and lots of people have issues with dairy. Or you can have, now GNC has a number of proteins. They're going to have soy protein, and they're going to have hemp pea and rice protein, and they're going to have N protein, and they've even got meat protein. So I have no problem people using protein shakes as a snack, but I prefer to give you real food. So as a general rule, we are into, if your lifestyle permits you to eat like a human, then eat like a human, not like an astronaut. If you don't have time, because you're a teacher, and I have lots of teachers, and you don't have time to eat, and you better get some calories in the next 30 seconds, if it's going to be a protein shake, that's fine. Let's make it the best, most quality protein shake, not going to spike your blood sugars, not full of lots of every single, if you read the label of the protein shake, it goes into chemistry by the second word. It's just very, very, very artificial, and that's probably not what your body wants. But if you can get a natural protein shake as a meal replacement because you just don't have time, that is okay. That's sad, but that's okay. That's where we use protein shakes. I use them as snacks. But they're not everyone doesn't go on a protein shake, Other questions? Guys, come on.
I'll ask one more.
Yes.
I've been eating more beans, so beans are carbohydrates and proteins. So now, how do I qualify them? Does, if I eat lima beans, I'm concerned, or black beans, or
So
beans.
we
So
like.
I'm eating more beans.
Yeah, so we like beans. Beans are actually pretty good protein. One of the things about protein is that protein is essentially amino acids, and There are amino acids that we make in the body, and then there are amino acids that we need to derive from our diet. They are called essential and non-essential amino acids. And proteins that have all the amino acids that we need are mostly animal proteins. So egg and meat, like beef and lamb and pork and chicken and turkey and fish. Animal proteins in general do have all the amino acids. Plant proteins in general do not have all the amino acids, except for certain ones. And one of the ones is a bean called soybean. Soy has a complete protein, has all the amino acids. So is hemp. So is spirulina. All of these, all these different things are actually complete proteins. So in terms of beans, it is true that that is a carbohydrate and it is also a protein. It is probably more a carbohydrate than a protein. But from time to time, if you want to have beans, I have no problem with that because it is still the carbohydrate in beans. A lot of it, or at least some of it, is fiber. And fiber is a very important carbohydrate. So again, you don't want to be, it's got to be more specific than I don't eat any carbs. That's ridiculous. What you want to be eating is the right type of carbs like fiber and not a lot of sugar and starch. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, is the diet for rheumatoid arthritis different from the diet for autoimmune disease? And how are those diets different from the Mediterranean diets?
I'm just so happy you asked me that question. That's like a really awesome question because then we can kind of expand a little bit. So we've been talking about the diet for metabolic diseases. All right, so now let's talk about a diet for rheumatoid arthritis. So big picture of this as to what is rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease where your immune system is hyperactive and is attacking part of the body. It can attack your gut, that's called Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease or ulcerative colitis. It can attack your joints, actually attacks the synovium in the joints, that is rheumatoid arthritis. It can attack your, pretty much it can attack the brain and the spinal cord, that's called multiple sclerosis. Same thing, it is an antibody. Your immune system is suddenly, instead of attacking viruses and attacking bacteria, it is attacking specifically some part of your body. So in the studies from Germany, because in Germany these are the diets, there is a diet that we use called a comprehensive elimination diet. This is based on protein. So again, it's a different diet from this one, and there are certain proteins that in general you don't eat, and in the clinical studies from Germany, about 40% of rheumatoid patients, and I can tell you this in my practice because I see plenty of rheumatoid patients, everything I do doesn't work on everybody, so I don't want anyone to think I'm a magician because I'm not. But I would say that about 40% of rheumatoid patients are going to get significantly better on their drugs or not on their drugs. The drugs don't make any difference in terms of whatever their drugs are on is fine. What I'm saying is that you'll get an additional something if you do a comprehensive elimination diet. So what is a comprehensive elimination diet? It is eliminating certain foods that may trigger an immune response. You are not allergic to them because an allergy is an immediate reaction, and we know all about allergies. This is more of a more nebulous concept that's probably kind of more we see in integrative medicine, more of a sensitivity to certain foods. So now we get into what are those foods, and the big ones that we see are eggs, dairy, gluten, soy, processed sugar, which is not a protein. But we also do lamb, we also do seafood, pork, beef, shellfish, nightshade vegetable. I mean, there's a whole long thing. This is why there's a whole protocol to this, but that's the kind of thing we would do for an autoimmune patient. So if you've got an autoimmune disease, when Dr. Herbert said the weird and the wonderful, whenever I have someone with the weird and wonderful, I take them off a whole load of foods and I see what happens. And sometimes it really helps, and sometimes it does nothing. I have no way to predict that. But that's what you do for rheumatoid. And can you see it's a totally different diet than the diet I just gave you? So it just is, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Back to your diet and exercise. If someone is on the high end of the exercise part, and And I remember reading that within 30 minutes of doing significant exercise, you want to get a certain proportion of, I believe it's carbohydrates and fat.
Yeah.
A lot of runners, for example, drink low-fat chocolate
Yep,
milk.
that's
after
exactly
a
what they
run.
do. That's a good
What
idea.
do you think would be to stay on the diet and knock down the lipids and things like that would be the right thing to take in that 30 minutes, which will
The
deal with
eating,
it?
so it's a great question. The eating plan works perfectly well. It actually works, it's much better if you're active. In general, people snack. So there's nothing about 3 meals a day. 3 meals, I don't know whoever came up with that. I have a theory about 3 meals a day. I'm going to tell you my theory. I have no evidence this is true. So I just have this theory, and I think it's a cute theory, so I'm going to stand by it, but it could be completely wrong. So we are all essentially hunter-gatherers. This is kind of the Paleolithic story. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to explain kind of why you need to be snacking. So the hunter and gatherers, I imagine, snacked. So they go out and they're hungry because most of the time we're hungry, so we have to eat. So they spend most of the day foraging and looking for stuff. So then they eat something and, remember, at this point, it's not really agrarian society. They're not eating a lot of starch. They're certainly not eating cultivated wheat. Okay, so there's no bread on a Paleolithic diet. So in general, when you eat things like bread and stuff, you get satiated. You're good. You're good for like 5 hours, right? Most people, I am stuffed. I had Thanksgiving and I had the meat and then I had a whole load of the stuffing and I had the pumpkin, whatever it was, pie and this, and so now I'm good, right? And there's lots of carbohydrate in that. So that will satiate you. However, what I think might have happened, this is my theory, is that as we became peasants, which is what most of us were, and we worked in the fields, I think our overbearers, our masters, did not like the fact that every 5 minutes we were going off to eat something, because that's not like snack break, that doesn't work. So you come up with a better idea, and the better idea is breakfast before you come to work, lunch, okay, I'll give you 1 meal, and dinner. So now you've got to work out, what am I going to eat that's going to satiate me for like 8 hours before I can go home at night and eat dinner? What's that? It's going to have to be a starch. It can't be anything else. It has to be a starch. So if you are eating less starch, you're eating less bread and less pasta and less potatoes, then you're going to have to eat every couple of hours. So in answer to your question, in the eating plan, every single one of the people who eat 6 times a day. You have breakfast, you have a snack, you have lunch, you have snack, dinner. The snack also, every single patient of mine eats dark chocolate every single day. You have to eat dark chocolate because of the health benefits of dark chocolate. So what do I do after exercise? I'm probably going to give them the nuts and the chocolate. Or I'm going to give them a piece of fruit. Or if they don't do well, I will give them a protein shake. I don't have a problem with chocolate milk. I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean, I'd like it to be lower, probably something you make. Anything that's made for you by someone else who is a multinational is not going to have made it well. Because they're trying to feed, it's a little tangent, but I just want to tell you this thing. It's so shocking what I'm going to tell you now about, I just can't get over that this is the way it works. Okay, so let's say I buy Danone. If anyone here is like the CEO, I apologize, but I'm just like, let's say I buy Danone strawberry yogurt, okay? I'm not even going to bother to look at the label, but I guarantee there's a lot of sugar in it, okay? And whereas if you get a low-fat plain yogurt and add berries, then you are much better along because there is certainly some sugar, there's lactose in the yogurt, it's fermented so there's less, and there's sugar, there's fructose in the berries along with fiber, but it's much better, your blood sugars don't go up, and it's much more natural, and your grandmother would be able to tell you that that's a strawberry yogurt, and she wouldn't know what this thing is. But I always say this to people, you never buy something that's sweetened by one of the other companies, because who are they trying to sweeten it for? They're not sweetening it for you guys, they're sweetening it for the kids. Because they want to get the kids to like it. So here's the study that's shocking. It turns out that kids, and this is a proper, real published study, kids have no level of sweetness that is too sweet. There is no such thing as too sweet. So on Thanksgiving, when you're eating pumpkin pie and somebody put 10 bottles of sugar, if you're an adult, at some point you're going to say, this is too sweet for me. There is no such thing in kids. So they took these kids and they gave them water and they added them, well, my daughter actually did this as a class project because she wanted to show it, and you add sugar and then you add more sugar and you dilute it, and in this stuff is sickly sweet. the kids can still drink it. So that's who they're trying to, I mean, it's horrific, it's horrific. So have yogurt, have berries, have nuts. Perfect. That's the food you'd have after exercise. Tangential, I realise, but you did get to the point. Go ahead.
Yes. How about supplement? I stopped using waste of money. Someone said so. How about that? Basically, I do a good diet. I think then I don't need something help.
So I think it's a really good question, and I'm going to say that we'll start off by saying that most of my patients are not on a whole list of supplements because we're using supplements that have published. Remember, I'm a physician at a hospital, and we teach, and we want to do this as scientifically as possible. So supplements that have published clinical studies that they are effective for the disease that you are treating it for. If that is an appropriate patient, I will. So my people today, and just how happened today was blood pressure day, my first, in the morning, the 3 patients that I saw, all not taking meds, they're taking a specific herb, which happens to be olive leaf extract, which has been used for about 2,000 years in Greece for high blood pressure, has been shown in published clinical studies to reduce your blood pressure. We even know how it does that. It does it because it works a bit like an ACE inhibitor. We know how it works. That is what you use a supplement for. As to a general supplement, most people are low in vitamin D, so you're probably, and definitely here, because where's the sun? The sun disappeared. So there's no more sun for like the next 6 months. So it might as well be in Norway. So we're going to have to take vitamin D because you're going to be deficient. And I personally think that most people's diets are a little too high in omega-6, which is inflammatory, so I like people to be on omega-3. That's kind of it, unless you have a specific disease that needs a specific supplement. The people who come in with 10,000 lists of stuff, I most of the time say, okay, why are you taking that? It's not that there's a problem taking it, it's just you want to take it if that's relevant to you. But to take it because you think it's going to prevent anything, that's not the evidence. The evidence doesn't show that. The evidence, we're doing evidence, and what you're looking at is, for example, I'll give you an example. Today, there's a study on resveratrol. Resveratrol you all heard of because it's, they use it, it's a polyphenol, and it comes out of red wine, and there was a whole thought about how this was going to make people healthy, and so a lot of people like resveratrol. And people usually take 50 to like 100 milligrams of resveratrol because they like taking supplements. And if you want to take resveratrol, go right ahead. But there's a study today that if you take 1,500 milligrams of resveratrol, which is 10 to 15 times the dose everyone takes, this is the real dose. If you have polycystic ovaries, which means that you are usually quite heavy and you can't ovulate, if we give you this, and usually testosterone levels are high, and so larger, younger women who aren't gonna, it's a real problem, and they have an increased risk of diabetes, and it's not nice, and they generally, have lots of facial hair. Turns out if you give them high doses of resveratrol, you will significantly drop their testosterone. You will significantly drop their insulin. Why am I telling you this? Because that's what you use resveratrol, in my opinion. Don't use it in a baby dose just because you think it might work. Use it because you actually have a problem for which it would be a solution. That's how we do supplements. You good?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Quick clarification, you said for blood pressure, was it olive?
Olive leaf extract. The disclosure, the necessary claim is that you have to speak to your doctor because it interacts with things. Very, very small little story. Yesterday got an email from a patient who's on olive leaves. This is the weirdest thing. She doesn't smoke. She's trying to get health insurance or life insurance, whatever she's trying to get. She's trying to get some kind of insurance. And when she goes and pees in the container, she's coming up with high levels of this cotinine cotinine that's found in tobacco. It's happened twice, and we think it's actually it's a byproduct of one of the 50 different substances in olive leaf extract. So you just got to remember that when you're taking supplements, you need to know what you're doing because there's untoward consequences.